And the other thing that I have that's going on that really changes is if you notice this bass pattern. This is the bass pattern from the first verse. Where it goes da na na, and then all of a sudden, when we enter this new section, it goes. So it's it's the same sound, but when you change up the bass like that, it really changes up the feeling and the emotion of what's going on in the track. And so I also have these little arps going on just as ear candy. But yeah, the big thing that's like the big change from the verse to the chorus section is that bass switch up. And so that completely like changes the vibe and kind of like hits you in your face with that impact to let you know that, oh, something's like changing in the track. And from there, what I like to do is in the verses, I like to have the vocal just like singing their lead by themselves, maybe with a couple harmonies, but in this case, the vocalist just has like one voice singing.
And I don't care that you're not okay.
But in the chorus section, what we have is we have the lead vocals.
You had my heart.
We have these vocal doubles.
You had my heart.
We have this kind of widened vocal.
You had my heart.
And then finally, I have a pretty much vocal where I took the lead vocal and dropped it down an octave and cut out a lot of the high frequencies just to give it a little more body to the vocals. So if you listen, it won't really be audible too much where you can't really like understand what they're saying. But when you kind of put all these vocals together, it creates a new vibe. And so that's the whole point of going from the verse to the chorus, is to let you know that something new is happening. And so I like to do all these little things to kind of build up the track with either the vocals or changing the bass to kind of like make it into a more bigger and exciting section. So let me play the low octave vocal really quick. So that sounds like really bad by itself. You never just play that by itself, but when played in context with all the other vocals.
You had my heart, and I thought that you'd trust me.
It creates more of, it adds a little more body to it and creates kind of a wider sense to the vocals where it sounds like multiple people are singing at once. And that is to kind of help people that are listening to be like, hey, this is kind of like a sing-along part. And so I'm just going to play the vocals as like I'm adding them on, just so that you guys can hear how it changes by adding these little extra vocals to it. So here's the lead, and then I'm going to add each vocal on top of it.
You had my heart, and I thought that you'd trust me, but I gave my all. I never thought it could hurt so much, 'cause it's so hard to hold on to us when you've already given up. It took so long for me to see that you were not the one for me.
And then a little creative thing that I did was I took away all the bonus vocals right at this little last line right here where she says, "You are not the one for me."
Not the one for me.
And so the idea behind that is right before the drop happens, which is the exciting part, is I want that phrase to really like stand out and for like everyone to kind of like say that together before the real emotion of the drop hits, which is the part where everyone is dancing to and going crazy about. But fun fact, when it came to making these vocals, I pretty much started with this lead vocal.
You had my heart.
And what I did was pretty much opened up an instance of Melodyne. And so if I were to open up Melodyne, there's an option to, let me see. So there's an option to pretty much take whatever you record, and you can see this little tab that says add random deviations. Actually, I don't even know if you guys can see this. You guys see my Melodyne open? You guys see Melodyne or no? It might not be popping up. But yeah, so Melodyne is like a really cool program that lets you get a lot of manipulation with vocals. So you can change the pitch, change the performance, the timbre, and everything like that. And so I'll play these doubles. But on Melodyne, what I did was pretty much use something called this random deviations function, and you can make tiny little random like variations to either the pitch or the timing of it. So that way it doesn't sound like it's the exact same vocals. And so when you hear them by themselves,
You had my heart, and I thought that you'd trust me.
so they're very auto-tuned and they sound like slightly different. Their timing is slightly different. And so that gives it the feel that they're having like more people singing with it. Ideally, you'd want to have the vocalist record this where they're doing their recorded doubles. But if you don't have access to that, again, like for me, Melodyne is like a really good option to add some variation to these doubles in a really easy way. And so, like I said, we have our left double, we have our right double, and then we have this, which is pretty much, for those that are familiar with, I'm using something called Little Micro Shift from Sound Toys, and that pretty much delays, it creates what's known as a Haas effect, where you have vocals that are delayed slightly. And so it makes it gives the vocals a sense of width and wideness. So if you listen to this,
You had my heart, and I thought that you'd trust me.
so it adds this kind of like chorusing effect where, like, again, the vocals are just slightly altered in terms of their timing. But when you stack that all together, it really creates a bigger and wider sound for the vocals. And so, and then also for the low octave vocals, what I did was I just used Melodyne to pitch everything down an octave. And again, I just EQ'd everything out so that way all the high ends cut out of it. So now let's go into the drop really quick, just because I really want to showcase some of the layers of sound design that I went through. So if we play the drop, so the biggest things that we have in the drop that's going on is we have this lead sound. We have these chords playing with the bass, and then obviously we have the drums. But I kind of want to just break down some of the sound design really quick since I only have 5 minutes left. So I pretty much used 4 layers on this lead sound. So the first layer that you kind of hear from this. So that first layer is a supersaw lead. I love supersaw leads just because of how much energy and life they bring into a track. They're very like high energy sounds, but in order to kind of get a more unique sound, I like to layer it with something else. So what I did for this is I layered it with this kind of square bass sound that sounds like very angry, which is why I call it the angry square. And then on top of that, what I like to do with these lead sounds is add some kind of percussive sound. So that way it has a little more hit on each beat. And so what I'm doing for that layer is I have this like little saw pluck hitting the notes with every note that goes on there. Because everything else is kind of like glidey or like held notes. But I wanted a little more percussive energy. So to add it, I add this saw pluck. And then I also added this little white noise hit, which is just like a white noise pluck. So it's just white noise being going through a pluck ADSR. So if you hear it, there's no pitch to it, but again, it adds like a little percussive sound. So I'm gonna add the lead slowly so that way you can hear what each sound is doing. So again, like the meat of it is really just going to be this like super saw and square wave sound. And then like the other two leads are to add like a little percussiveness to it, or it adds like a little hit on each note. And that's how I kind of came up with this lead sound. Next up that I want to go over is really these chords, because I think these chords like really add a lot of feeling to the track, where you hear like, to me, the chords really adds a lot of the emotion to this track. And so what's going on is I have like this chord sound, you have this bass sound, and then you have a sub bass. And so for the chords, I really just used one patch mainly, which sounds like this. And so that's basically just a detuned square wave with a detuned saw wave that's an octave higher. So I wish I could pull up sound so that way like you guys can see what's really going on under the hood. But if anyone wants to get more depth and detail into sound design, I'd be more than happy to work offline with anyone. So feel free to reach out. So that's the first layer, is that synth patch. And then on top of that, what I really like to add to give it like a lot more texture is white noise. So there's no pitch to white noise, but it adds a little bit of dirtiness and a little texture to the saws. So if you listen to it, it doesn't sound good by itself, but you listen to the synths and then the white noise to it, it really adds a lot. So I'm gonna play the synth and then I'm gonna play it with the white noise. So it adds like a little bit of texture and a little bit of high-end excitement to it when you like layer the synth sounds with white noise. And what's really going to give it like a lot of power is this bass sound. So I like to use like really gritty bass sounds. So total together it sounds like this. And what I'm doing is pretty much, this is the main bass sound, which is kind of a detuned saw wave as well. But what I'm layering it with is something that I just named Gritty plus 7. So what I did was this sound, I duplicated the sound and I opened up Serum. And so with one of the patches, I put it up 7 semitones higher, which is in music theory known as a perfect fifth or a power chord. So when you add it 7 semitones higher and then also an octave higher, you create what's known as a power chord. And to me, I think when it comes to bass sounds, power chords adds a lot more quote unquote power to the track. So again, here's the power chord by itself. And then here's with it with the original bass. And then on top of that, I added this little thicker layer, which just kind of gave it a little more grit. and together it all sounds like, I'll add them all together so that way you can hear how the sound's changing. And so that's how you kind of get that thick bass. And then finally, we just have a sub bass, which is probably like an octave lower, but you don't really hear much of the sound. You feel sub bass more than you hear it. And then finally, all together, you have this with the chords. And I'm just going to add everything one at a time so you kind of hear how the layers come together. And so there you have it. One other thing to note is you might hear that all the sounds are kind of ducking towards the kick. And so that's something that's popular in dance music where it's known as sidechain compression. I'm using something called LFO tool to do this, but there's a lot of other cheaper options like Kickstart or a volume shaper, or you can just use a compressor to kind of have it compress when the kick hits. But anyways, I'm going a little over time, so hope you guys learned something from this. Yeah, this is kind of like my creative process and what I go through when I'm trying to put stuff together. But honestly, a lot of this comes down to just experimentation and trying to figure out like what sounds good and what works with your track. But anyways, thanks so much for spending your Saturdays with us. I really hope you guys learned something from not only me, but from everyone else in the group. And again, like I said, you can reach me on anything, either like literally if you just look up at Robbie Heights, you can find me on my socials. Reach out to me if you have any questions or if you want me to go a little more in depth and show you, I guess, what I'm using. Like a lot of this was made in Serum when it comes to sound design. But yeah, anyways, I hope you guys learned something and take care. Have a happy Saturday.
All right, Robbie, thank you. You were amazing. That was a really helpful talk. Loved having a deep dive. That was a really so next up we have Tom Salta. We're going to take a short break in between, and we'll be back with you in just a moment.